This conference will now be recorded.
So I think you'll find it's quite enlightening at times, rather than more of just a verbal approach to going through Revelation. And you might be able to see connections to the rest of the Bible and other visuals that happen in the rest of the Bible, which will help us to come to hopefully some accurate conclusions, or at least some really good guidelines to head us in the right direction. I think that's really the key tonight, is to kind of be able to put on our PowerPoint tonight the best visual that we can possibly, as accurately as possible, to kind of give us the best guideline or tool to interpret the Revelation. So that's sort of the key tonight. And yes, we're going to be taking some suggestions and opinions about how things are interpreted tonight, for sure. But again, I don't think anything's locked in. I know other people have different opinions. But again, using the visual approach, always going back to what the Bible is saying, we can use that as a tool to keep an open mind and always look at what potentially God could be, Jesus could be trying to share with us in an ever-increasing, ever-growing, developing way. Seals, judgments, earthquake is what we're going to be looking at tonight. It's the first series of the 7 that occur on the earth. There's these patterns of 7. So let's just establish the picture a little bit, and we'll put the globe in place, because Revelation affects the world. I'm going to put John there as well. John was the one that received the revelation, and he's looking a bit larger than life there, as you can see. After all, he was one of the sons of thunder. He's in Patmos when he received the revelation. So I thought maybe I'd share a couple of things about Patmos before we get too carried away. Now, because this is quite visual, for you guys who are looking at this online, there is a way that you can scroll or increase the size of the PowerPoint and reduce my face. You want to make my face as small as possible and the PowerPoint as big as possible for your aid, so that you can see the detail a little bit better, how we go through this. Patmos. Well, has anyone ever been to Patmos? I was very blessed in 2012 to go with Josie on a bit of a world trip, and we went on a Greek island tour, and one of the islands we went to was Patmos. So here's a view from one of the high points in Patmos. This was the place where John was in exile. Now I'm looking around and I'm seeing it's actually quite a lovely place, despite the fact that it was a place of capture or holding John against his will. So here's some really nice scenes there from Patmos. The tour took us to this place, which is where they say John received the revelation. Of course, these places have to do this, and like every holy site in and around those areas, no more so than in Jerusalem, they tend to build structures around the site, often a church of some form. And so this was it. And you see the mosaic above the door, John receiving the revelation. Now I turned the camera around to take a photo of the view, thinking that if John indeed was here getting the revelation, that was the view that he was getting. And I thought, well, that's not such a bad view after all, if he is restricted to be in this place against his will or whatever. But the little stairs took us down to what we'd call a cave, and we went into it to see the place actually where John, they say, received the revelation. And it was just like it was a cave, let's be honest. There was rocks. There was a rock ledge which you could do the writing on or whatever else, and it was quite interesting. And this stone was put there with the inscription, Holy Cave of the Apocalypse. I was on the island of Patmos, it says. Okay, that's enough about Patmos and setting the scene a little bit. If you turn to chapter 4 in Revelations, this is where we will start. So I've got John actually on Patmos to the best of my ability on the globe. I hope you can recognise what's happening here. I've actually situated the globe to show the area of the world that we need to see as we go through this. So he's pretty much on Patmos there, and he has been on Patmos and in this revelation up until now. But what happens next is, behold, a door is standing open in heaven, and this is what he sees. And then he hears a voice, and the voice speaking to him like a trumpet. It says, "Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this." Now, this is a connection, I think, to Revelations 1:1, where it says right at the beginning, these are the things that are shortly going to come to pass. I take these two statements, and I think we can understand that from the time that John received this, we are now going to see some prophecy fulfilled. And so when did John receive it? Well, it's most likely received after AD 70, after the sacking of Jerusalem. So in terms of the interpretations and things that might surely come to pass and the way that things are displayed or shown here, we're looking after this time to see if anything matches and forms, fits nicely into the picture that's given. So it says in verse 2, at once he was in the Spirit. And so this can only mean John now being lifted up into heaven to see this vision. And it's a heavenly vision. It's worthwhile considering at what point John is on earth and in heaven, because it really dictates the state of the vision. Things that are happening on earth are earthly, things that are happening in heaven are glorious and wonderful and heavenly and future and kingdom related. And in this particular time, he's looking into these doors in heaven, and this is what he sees. He had the, behold, a throne stood in heaven, and one seated on the throne. Right, let's bring it a bit closer so we can see this vision a bit better. There we go. So there's this throne, one seated. He had the appearance of jasper and carnelian, and around the throne was a rainbow that had the appearance of an emerald. And around the throne were 24 thrones. Seated on the thrones are 24 elders, clothed in white garments with golden crowns on their heads. From the throne there were flashes of lightnings and rumblings, pearls of thunder, and before the throne were burning 7 torches of fire, which are the 7 spirits of God. And behold, and before the throne there was, as it were, a sea of glass, like crystal. So hopefully that's all represented there, not too badly. Now the next thing we have in verse 6 that continues, around the throne, on each side of the throne, are 4 living creatures, full of eyes in front and behind. The first creature is like a lion, the second like an ox, the third with the face of a man, and the fourth living creature like an eagle in flight. So what we want to do now is we want to put these beasts in this image. And what's really interesting about doing a visual approach like this, when you're actually producing this or when you're actually drawing it and trying to kind of see what John saw, you're kind of forced to put things where they need to be, or it makes you question, well, where are things placed? And if you look up all the many visuals of this scene, the beasts are placed around the throne in all manner of different arrangements. They're arranged diagonally, they're arranged in many different arrangements with the beasts facing different ways. But when we're trying to produce this, I'm asking the question, where actually are they placed? It doesn't actually say in these verses in Revelation, but is there anything else in the Bible that could help us to position these beasts around the 4 sides of the throne correctly? It doesn't say diagonally, it talks about 4 sides. So we're expecting to see a beast on the front of the throne, 2 on the sides, and 1 behind. Well, Ezekiel will help us here, because we have 4 beasts in Ezekiel coming out of the north toward Ezekiel as he sees this vision. The 4 beasts are different in that they are more like a man, and he describes them like a man first of all, because they stand like a man, they've got arms and legs and a body like a man. The only thing different is that they have 4 heads each, and the 4 heads are facing a certain direction. It's mentioned twice in this Ezekiel chapter 1 that these beasts do not turn around, they're always heading in a straight line, which means that these faces are always pointing in the same direction. So what do we have in verse 10? They 4 had the face of a man. So he's mentioned once again the man, and I believe because he's coming towards him, he sees the man first, so therefore the man is on this front side. The face of the lion is on the right side. There's no mistake as to which facing or which way the lion is facing. And the face of the ox is on the left. And then by default, the eagle is behind. There's another way we can look at this as well. If you go to the camp of Israel, and so you've got the division of the tribes of Israel as they're arranged around the tabernacle, divided into 4 quarters, and they are each described as having banners for each quarter and each head of the tribes. Now, there's nothing black and white that suggests that these 4 faces, the faces of the cherubim, are actually on these banners. But for some reason, there is monumental confidence of what they are. And so Reuben, the head of the south tribes, is pictured with the banner or the standard of the faith of the man that's facing south. East, Judah the lion. Dan, head of the north tribes. The eagle face is on the banner there, and then the ox to the west. You've got things like Genesis 49, which we went through last week. Reuben, thou art my firstborn, suggesting a man. Judah as a lion's whelp, there's actually no debate, of course, what Judah would stand for, and if there was ever going to be a banner for the tribe of Judah, of course it would be the head of the lion. In the blessings that Jacob gave, he recorded Dan as the judge of his people, and the eagle has always been, or is quite often rendered, a symbol of judgment in the Bible. So there's little things like that you can put together. And so we have the 4 faces here in the camp of Israel, but we also have the directions. So now what I think we can do is we can actually place these beasts correctly around the throne room. So the lion is going to be facing to the right, facing east. The ox is going to be facing west, or to the left, as it says in Ezekiel. The man will be facing this way, straight to us. And the eagle, who's flying, it says, will be behind the throne. So that, I believe, would be the correct biblical way that these beasts are positioned. And I thought that was actually quite a blessing to actually consider this a little bit more deeply, to go, well, where are they? Where are they placed? Because I think it's really important as to how Revelation proceeds, because these beasts influence certain actions on earth, and maybe, just maybe, the directions are important. So we're going to go to that. There's some wonderful blessings and praise that come from this scene. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. It's the beasts praising. And the 24 elders, worthy are you, O Lord our God, to receive glory and honour and power, for you created all things, and by your will they existed and were created. So a wonderful scene of praise and glory to God. Has anyone noticed anything in this scene? Does it look similar? Is there connections with anything else in the Bible? Suggestion is the temple, the tabernacle. So what do we have? We have the amazing glory that shone from the mercy seat, from the Ark of the Covenant. We're seeing that here. We have the cherubims that surrounded the Ark of the Covenant. We have the 4 faces. We have the 7 branched candlestick in those 7 burning torches. The sea of glass could well be the laver that was used to wash. And more temple things would be the 24 elders. If you go to David, he set up the 24 Levitical order for the arrangements and the service in the temple. So we've got all this temple tabernacle connection in this vision from heaven that John is seeing. It's the mind of God, what he desires and what he's always desired to be on earth, him glorified in these symbols. You're probably thinking there's a couple of missing things, but that's okay because they are coming. And we will see some more implements of the temple turn up here in this vision. And even in what we're not going to do, the altar of incense turns up in chapter 8 or 9. Okay, so we move to Revelation chapter 5. We have that all established now. What we see now is in the right hand of him who's seated, a scroll turns up, written on the back, sealed, 7 seals, and then there's a mighty angel who is worthy to open the scroll. And so there's the scroll there now with 7 seals. And John's unhappy because no one is worthy to open the scroll, verse 4. But don't worry, said one of the elders in verse 5, weep no more, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, who has conquered, he will open it. And so we have between the throne and the 4 living creatures and among the elders, I saw the lamb. So I'm going to put that here now. This lamb has 7 horns, 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God. And it looks as though it had been slain. So clearly the Lord Jesus represented here, the one who is worthy to open the scroll. Now, you might remember only a few weeks ago, Brother Robert ran through this quite nicely in a visual display by way of exhort. And that was really good. Let me harp on about this scene. It's a wonderful scene, and it continues on with lots of praises and glory from all the characters in the scene here. There's singing songs. And so that's as far as I go on there with chapter 5 and establishing this heavenly vision of the temple. So what next? Well, let me see, I'll just push the button and see what happens. All right, so we're going to bring this scene back to where it was before, sitting over the globe. And we want to ask ourselves the question, if we're going to be quite specific in directions, because we've carefully set up these cherubims in the right position, and they're going to be dictating what happens on earth. Oh yeah, that's right. I'm going to add some more details. We need a sun later, so I'm putting a sun in. We need a moon. Yep. We need some more stars. There we go. Cool. Right. So as I was saying before, the direction I think is important. We're going to see that. So as we go through the seals being opened, the beasts all have a part to play. There are directional commands happening. And so I guess the question is, we need to make sure that this heavenly vision is in the right spot. Because if it is directional, and if there is information coming out specific to direction, if the kingdom vision is in the wrong spot, then we're going to be all over the place. So where should the kingdom vision be? And I think it should be only in one of 2 places, above Jerusalem or directly above where John is in Patmos, which is pretty much Asia Minor, where the 7 ecclesias are. So one of those 2, and they're pretty close, let's be honest. Jerusalem is geographically the center of the world. God chose Jerusalem for many, many reasons, including the fact that Jerusalem is the most accessible place in all of the world to go to if you were to worship him. So I think it's quite easy to see if you're going to divide the world between east and west. This line that I've drawn here, down here, running along the coast of the Mediterranean and down the coast of Israel, would probably define or divide east and west. And we have seen over the ages the great shift from east to west, the great pendulum shift of the powers. The first one's probably the Assyrians, then the Babylonians, then the Assyrians coming from the east, pushing west. And then, of course, the Greeks who responded, and they pushed that pendulum back from the west over to the east under Alexander, going as far as India. And so the swing of east to west has been happening through the ages. And this line kind of dictates the center point of where east and west lies. Yeah, I think that in a way positions our heavenly vision where we want it to be. Not talking about north and south though, but east and west is enough at this point. Oh yeah, cool. Now I watched when the Lamb opened one of the 7 seals. This is in chapter 6. And I heard one of the 4 living creatures say with a loud voice like thunder, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a white horse. Now it says one of the creatures. We don't actually know which creature, but by default, by looking at the other creatures, which are all numbered, and were all numbered previously, we know that this first creature is in fact the lion that speaks. And he says, "Come." And this is the interesting thing about being directional. If the lion is in fact facing east, he is directing this command, "Come," potentially to draw something from the east. He's commanding something to come. And therefore, what comes is this white horse. There's a man on it with a bow, crown has been given to him, and he's come out to conquer. So let's carry on with this before we get too much into perhaps interpretations, because we want to finish this vision here. There's another seal that's opened, and the second living creature, which we know is the ox, because it was numbered in the setup previously, he yells out, "Come." And so if he's speaking from the right direction, he will be speaking out towards the west, calling something to come. I think the best translation is just simply "come" here. I know some translations say "come and see," but I think it fits quite nicely if we've got these 4 beasts actually commanding something to come, and in this particular case, from a specific direction. What comes in response to the ox beast? Well, it's a red horse, and the rider is carrying a sword. The next beast yells, "Come." He's facing south, the man. And so therefore, we're getting it straight back at us here in our position. And what comes is, and what responds to the call is a black horse. The rider had his pair of scales in his hand. We'll go through what's actually said later in more detail. And the eagle, which is at the back of the throne, must simply yell out, "Come," behind the throne, therefore drawing the pale horse from the north in a southerly direction to come. And this rider's name was Death, and Hades followed him. And so we have all these horsemen now appeared, all called from these beasts directionally. What else can we do? Well, where can we go in the Bible that will help us out with these horsemen and perhaps actually help to confirm maybe the directions that they came from? Well, we do have 4 horses and colours, very similar to Revelations and Zechariah. chapter 6. These are going forth to the four winds of the heaven, it says. And then in verse 6 it says, the chariot with the black horse goes towards the north. Now that fits with the black horse that's in Revelations. It's going towards the north. It's been called from the south, and so therefore it's traveling in a northerly direction. The white one goes towards the west country. So we know that fits as well. It's exactly the same as what we've got here. It's traveling from the east, but it's in a westerly direction coming towards. The dappled ones, which is the colour of the horse in Zechariah 6, which doesn't entirely fit the colours here, but is the most likely match. It's the one that's been called from the north side to come south. So that fits as well. And the only horse that doesn't do anything in Revelation is the red horse, so by default we put it on the west. So you can see in Zechariah that there is definitely a connection to colours and directions. So again, I think we're forced to think about the specific directions of where these horses are coming from. Something that's quite interesting though in Zechariah that come up, and that was in verse 5, these horses are going forth to the four winds of heaven. I really like that because there's a connection later on. If you shoot over to chapter 7 just briefly, this is after the seals have been all opened. More judgments are about to happen on the earth, and this is what happens in the first verse of chapter 7. After this, I saw four angels standing at the four corners of the earth, holding back the four winds of the earth, that no wind might blow on the sea, earth, or against any tree. And so we have a connection between horses and wind. And I'm sure you've heard in the Bible many times God talking about the four corners of the earth, or the four winds, or the four spirits of the earth. When we're looking at these horses, it's very likely that we're considering the four winds. And of course, the four winds are coming from every direction. And of course, it's probably suggesting that God's judgments that are about to happen are full and complete and coming from every direction. There is no escape. God has full power over man, and there will be judgments coming from every single direction. Four corners, four winds. So let's consider these horses as winds. And the picture in chapter 7 is quite interesting. You've got four angels holding back the winds. But you could imagine, it's really hard to imagine angels holding back winds, but you could imagine angels holding back horses. You imagine horses at the beginning of a race, rearing to go, full of energy, chomping at the bit. They want to go. And you've got four angels holding them back, because God says they must be held back just for a moment, because I've got to do something. I've got to seal these 144,000. I'm holding back these judgments, holding back these horses. So I really like that connection between horses and wind here, and that was helped by Zechariah chapter 6. Okay, so where are we going now? What we want to do, right, let's then have a look at the horses. We want to consider now a little bit of perhaps the interpretation of what these horses might mean. We have the clue now to the directions of where they're coming, if that helps, and hopefully it does. And I'm well aware that there are slightly different views on how this is portrayed. So let's see how we go. The white horse is this rider with a bow, crown is given to him, and he's come out conquering and to conquer. And he's coming from the east. Now, probably traditionally, this horse has been interpreted as being a time of peace. Now, if we are taking Revelation as something that's starting to happen at the time of John, when he's received this revelation onwards, we would know that Jerusalem has been sacked and Rome is in power. We're going to see God judge now the current power on the earth. and that would be Rome. And particularly, you might want to call it pagan Rome at this particular point. So traditionally, this horse has been rendered peace because he's holding a bowless arrow and he's conquering. That's actually fair in some ways, because after Rome was sacked, we had the Emperor Vespasian take control, and there were 5 emperors after him, and they were all regarded as the good emperors. Just trying to find that information. And these good emperors generally run the empire in a time of peace. And this was a time where the Christians were able to operate freely, and there was a great spread of the truth around the empire. And so this is how this horse is generally portrayed. However, the other 3 horses that turn up are very much judgments on the Roman Empire. So why is this horse not a judgment too? Even though it does fit that there is a time of peace potentially now, and the horse is white and there's a bowless arrow. So let's just consider one other option. And it's all to do with the fact that the horse came from the east. And so what came from the east that would be regarded as a judgment on Rome? And so I've got a picture here of the Parthian Empire. Now this empire started like any empires, I mean, small beginnings. Nomadic tribes, the Pani, started, and they developed in power, and they took on the powers that existed at the time. These guys really are Persians, ancient Persians, and they were powerful. They were ambitious, and so they grew into this empire called the Parthian Empire. And if you're going to Google the Parthians, and I didn't know much about them before this, but you will see the titles come up over and over again. Rome's greatest enemy, Parthians. Why Rome didn't become Roman Persian, the Parthians. These Parthians were a strong people that were constantly in the thorn, in the side of the Roman Empire. As the Rome tried to push east, these people resisted, and these people took land. Roman took land. It was just an ongoing issue of land wars, and it was just quite an amazing time, really. Armenia was a place in the north there that Rome took, but Parthians got back, and then they fought over that. The Parthian Empire wasn't squeaky clean though, but there was lots of civil war. It was just as disastrous as Rome in some ways, but at one point they were equally as powerful as Rome. And if you look at the time period when they existed, fits roughly quite nicely around when we're looking. They grew in power, and there's something that I want to share. A great battle took place around 55 BC. So this is actually before Christ. This is before the time that we're dealing with, but it highlights the power of these people. A commander called Marcus. I actually legit, I'm trying to find my bit of paper here. Oh, here we go. There we go. Marcus Crassus. He was a leader of the Roman Empire at some point, and around that time of 50 BC, he led a Roman army of 40,000 troops to that region. It became a famous battle called the Battle of Carrhae. The Parthians were outnumbered 4-1, and the Parthians were victorious. It was one of the greatest defeats that Rome ever suffered in their empire and their development. 20,000 Roman soldiers were reported to be killed, 10,000 were taken captive. It was a massive defeat for Rome, and the Parthians took it. And here's one of the reasons why. What is famous for these guys is called the Parthian shot. It's a technique, it's a war tactic that was specific to these guys. Romans were mainly infantry, but these guys were mainly cavalry, and so they used horses, and they were incredibly skilled on horses. Not only that, they were incredibly skilled archers. So what they would do is they would ride in their horses in this formation. They would be shooting arrows at the Romans, and then at the last minute they would turn in like a retreat, but they would themselves would turn as the horse was riding away and shoot arrows, and they would do it very accurately. And you can only imagine when you're looking like you can chase these guys, like the Romans would have thought they could have done when they were retreating, then they would have let down their guard and tried to take ground, but they were getting showered with accurate arrows back at them from this Parthian shot technique that the Parthians adopted. It's incredible. And they used this technique through so many of their battles, and of course it was recorded that in this battle that they used it, and they were incredibly successful. The Parthians hardly lost a soldier. You know, everyone's on a horse, everyone is moving fast, they're a hard target, and so many Romans died. So the Parthian shot, there we go. And I learned later that the Mongolians adopted this same thing as well. Just to prove once again, that the Parthians were great archers, and they kind of used it as a symbol of who they were. Some of the coins that were minted around that period of the Parthian Empire showed on the back, quite often, a guy holding a bow. If you have a look there, 3 of those coins through the ages of Parthians is a guy holding a bow. Does this not match the white horse with the guy holding a bow? It seems to quite nicely, doesn't it? And the horse is coming from the east, and the Parthians were an incredible force against the Romans and inflicted a lot of pain. Was this a judgment on the Romans coming from the east, as called by the beast from the east? Well, we can put that down as a very good potential. We have the red horse, who's been called from the west. And so we talked about the peace that happened in the time of the first 5 emperors after the sacking of Jerusalem, the good emperors. And during those 5 emperors, they called a time period called Pax Romana, which was the peace of Rome. But after that, it was downhill. The son of that, the last of the 5 emperors, was Commodus, and he was bad news, and you might have heard about Commodus. But what I have records here is from that time, for 100 years, there were about, that time period was shared by 80 emperors. And so that's representative of a massive amount of unrest, so much conspirators, coups, war, internal, civil, and a lot of bloodshed. And it's regarded as one of the world's worst time of unrest. And so what's interesting is the sword that is recorded here is the word machera. And it's probably better rendered short sword or dagger, which has been rendered probably best as an assassin's weapon. And that fits quite well for this time period, if indeed this horse represents this time period, because of all the assassinations that happened and all of these emperors that ruled after this peaceful time. So I believe that fits very well. And why it's been called from the west is that the center of this empire was in fact Rome. And you'll see where the horse is sitting, right over Rome. It did affect obviously the whole empire really, but the main amount of bloodshed and unrest was happening right in Rome. The next horse that was called was from the south, and it was the black horse. And so what have we got here? We've got some more details. The voice in the midst of the four living creatures saying, as this horse approached, a quart of wheat for a denarius, 3 quarts of barley for a denarius. Do not harm the oil and the wine. And so this represents a time of famine and food shortages, in particular wheat. And so, yeah, I don't have heaps on this, but Rome had a very interesting history with farming. It was all to do with the mix between farmers and the military. And I did find out some interesting information where a lot of the military, a lot of the soldiers were actually farmers. And so, as well as being a soldier, they would also try and manage their farms. Now, there was a lot of wheat grown in Italy at the time. And while the war campaigns were close to Rome, that was fine. You could be a farmer and a soldier and operate pretty closely and still manage your farm okay. But as the campaigns spread out, these military campaigns became longer. The farmers had to go on much longer excursions and they were away from their farms for years. And as it turns out, when they would come back to their farms, they were in a complete state of disarray, unfarmable, and they were broke and they had to sell. And so much of this farmland was sold. And of course, who bought the farmland? It was the rich. The rich bought the farmland, and from what I understand, so much of the rich converted the farmland that was originally grain, they converted to olives and vineyards. Now, you have to be rich to grow these things because you don't get much return from them for the first couple of years. You have to be able to manage that. But once that's away, then you can get quite a good return off this farmland. So there's a lot of farms turned up, growing vineyards, growing grapes, and growing olives, which is quite interesting. Because if you look at this judgment that's proclaimed, it says, do not harm the oil and the wine. So it's suggesting that there was a time of plentiful oil and wine, but a massive shortage of grain. Why is this horse coming from the south, though? Well, from what I understand, because grain farming had disappeared from Italy, they had to import the grain. And where did they import the grain? Well, mainly from Egypt and mainly from North Africa. So, yeah, so we've got this idea where the horse is coming from the south. Now, what's the problem? Well, we had to import grain and it was hugely expensive to bring in grain. You had to ship it. There was barges, there was boats. It would have been a tough job to get the grain. Well, much more expensive, and therefore prices would have gone up. But from what I understand, there was also droughts that occurred affecting Egypt. The Nile didn't flood on certain years, therefore the grain stock depleted, and there was famine. The grain was the staple of the Roman Empire, and they simply run out of grain. So this kind of shows a little bit about what's going on here, I believe. The other horse that turns up is the pale horse. The rider's name was Death, and Hades followed him. And they were given authority over the fourth of the earth to kill with the sword and with famine and with pestilence and by wild beasts. All right, so this beast, or sorry, this horse and rider really have the monopoly on bad things. They kind of have it all, really. Almost all of what we've seen happens from the north, if you like. Now, this is the one I struggled the most with in terms of getting the direction right. But one of the things that is very connected with this is pestilence. And of course, there was a massive plague that happened in Rome, or multiple plagues. The first one that fits this period is the Antonine Plague. And they believe that this first came from the siege of Seleucia, which actually, as you can see on the map, is the east. This is the Parthian-Roman Wars. They believe this disease came from there, so from the east. But the Roman soldiers brought this disease back. It spread very quickly and easily through Rome from all the trade routes. And as you know, with COVID, the way it spread around the world, no different here. And very quickly, Rome was suffering a massive pandemic of this Antonine Plague, which they say is probably more similar to smallpox. Now, you're probably looking at that going, well, that's nothing to do with coming from the north. And it's not really at all. In fact, it's coming from the east. And so I was still trying to figure out the directional thing here. What I found with this exact study, though, one of the major effects of a pandemic like this was this massive amount of death. And they say 5 million, potentially even more, died of the population of Rome. It was absolutely colossal. And so one of the great effects of this would have been the death of the military. The military would have lost so much manpower. The recruits coming in, where were they? And of course, the soldiers that lost their lives. And so what happened, it weakened their front line. And I was very interested to find that their biggest front line was to the north. And their biggest threat to the north were the barbarians. And the barbarians moved in because they just had less of a force to come up against. And so you've got this potential pandemic leading to an invasion of the north, helping the barbarians take their place in their land and inflict pain on the Romans. So it does kind of fit the idea of coming from the north as well. This does include that. The idea of beasts, as it mentioned, some people would say that the barbarians actually typified the beasts as well. So that's one way of looking at it. So there we have these 4 directions, these 4 winds that bring judgment on the power of the then known world, which is Rome. It's all happening, and it seems to fit quite well if you look at it this way. I wanted to put up this title. What we're looking at is the rulership of God over earth. What is said in heaven happens on earth. God says, and it happens. And that's just an overarching theme that really is coming back at or shown to us constantly in this vision. Here we have time. Oh, yeah. We have another vial, another seal that's opened. What do we got? 9, verse 9. And he opened the 5th seal, and I saw under this altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the witness they had borne. We have souls. We have dead people. They have been slain on account of service to God. And what's interesting is that they're under the altar. So I'm just going to put an altar here. And now, as you'll know, this adds to the scene of the temple. This is most likely the altar of burnt sacrifice, which helps to highlight the fact that these people have sacrificed themselves, or they've been slain on account of God's word, serving. And they shout with a loud voice, these people, these souls, O sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long before you will judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? So this seal really isn't a judgment like we've seen in the 4 previous seals. This is a seal that turns our attention to the righteous and those that have lost their life. And they're crying out to God, when and how long? And when each of them are given a white robe, and we'll give them a white robe now, there we go, they're told to rest a little longer until the number of their fellow servants and their brothers should be complete, who were to be killed as they themselves had been. It's a very tragic time when you consider that in this Roman Empire that people were losing their lives, they were being persecuted. It's despite, on top of all the disasters that these winds are bringing, Christians are being persecuted. But I was quite stoked to see that in chapter 3 previously, we've got some nice connecting words with these people. And it's in the letter to Sardis. Yet you have still a few names in Sardis, people who have not soiled their garments. Now they will walk with me in white, for they are worthy. The one who conquers will be clothed thus in white garments, and I will never blot out his name out of the book of life. I will confess his name before my Father and before his angels. These people who are worthy, that have been given white garments, are going to be confessed to God. In verse 10, this is the next ecclesia. Because you have kept my word about patient endurance, I will keep you from the hour of trial that is coming on the whole world to try those who dwell on the earth. I am coming soon. Hold fast that you have, so that no one may seize your crown. And so just a sort of a statement of hope to hang in there. So that fits the seal quite well, I thought, in the people that have been justified. Well, they're seeking justification from God. They're going, God, we've just had this hard time. When are you going to justify us? Before we mention these again, and I could do if we've got time, we're going to have to go to the next seal. And the next seal starts in verse 12. And he opened the sixth seal, and I looked, and behold, there was a great earthquake. So let's make an earthquake happen. Let's see if we can get it to happen. There we go. A bit of an earthquake is happening. The sun became black as sackcloth. There we go. We've turned it black. The full moon will become like blood. They turned to blood. And the stars of the sky, they fell to the earth as the fig tree sheaths its winter fruit. So they will drop a few of the stars down to the earth like that. And then this weird thing happens. The sky vanishes like a scroll that has been rolled up, and every mountain and island is removed from its place. So I attempted to roll up the sky here. Let's see if we can roll the sky up. Hopefully you can see it roll up there. There we go. The sky's been rolled up like a scroll. There we go. As well as the mountains and the islands, they've removed, they've been flattened. The kings of the earth and the great ones and the generals and the rich and the powerful, everyone, slave and free, they're hiding. They're hiding in caves and in the rocks. They're calling on the mountains. Fall on us, hide us from the face of him who is seated on the throne. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who can stand? This is similar language to what we've seen before in the rest of the scripture, and that will help us to understand what's actually happening here. We've heard about great earthquakes, black suns, bloody moons, falling stars, heavens rolled up. We've heard it all before. Mountains and islands removed, men hiding. And every time this symbology is being described, it's associated with places or civilizations or countries. And all of them, it's not good. They're finished. It's the end of an age. It's the end of a power when you start seeing a country or a city associated with this symbology. And so because we've been dealing with pagan Rome, the then known power just after the time when John receives this revelation, we can assume that pagan Rome is done. It's finished. No more. It will never rise again. And of course that did happen when Constantine took the throne, ridding pagan Rome, turning it to Christian. So that's one way of looking at it. That's an empire crushed, defeated, as predicted by God in the Revelations, as predicted by Jesus. Of course, it continues, but that is where I'm at with how far I've been allotted and how far I've got. Feel free to come on and share anything. If you've got questions, please.
Thank you, Darryn. That's an amazing amount of work and detail you put into that. And as you say, once you see the visual, it sort of makes it a lot clearer to what is actually being told. And so thanks for all that hard work in the background that you've done there. I've not seen anything quite like that before in terms of explaining Revelation. So that's amazing. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David. Do you know what book then I might have been referring to? The one that I was using that was helping me out a little bit with the visual approach.
Well, I could guess, but a little birdie told me. I think it was. I think is it Jeff and Ray Walker's book?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Here it is.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah. You've got that on your bookshelf. Well, it's well worth a read. It appealed to me because I'm visual. I like the visuals, and they pretty much drew all of Revelation in their own little wee sketchy type way, covering every element and just mapping the whole thing, which is incredibly interesting, that approach, I thought.
I think they did it on a flannel graph at Bible class at their meeting. And we
On a what?
A flannel graph.
What's that?
That show my age, isn't it? It's well,
the thing is that the
board.
Yeah, that's right. It's
like a soft board, and things.
It's a felt board with a great big board made of felt, and you put felt cutouts on it of the shapes to make up the picture.
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course they stick to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it was called a flannel board. Yeah, it wouldn't be. It's not a term that's used much today.
We've probably still got some in
Well,
the cupboard.
they used whatever technology they had at the time, and PowerPoint
That's what they.
probably wasn't the thing, so they went with that.
Well, well, the thing is, I mean, if you told Jeff and Ray that you're going to be using a PowerPoint, they would probably think you were using a ballpoint pen.
True.
Yeah.
I think the old limelight ones would have been better, wouldn't
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah. No, the thing is that Jeff and Ray, I think, they were quite arty.
She was an art teacher.
Yeah, and so they would be able to read, you know, these visions in Revelation, and she would just sketch them
As well.
as they were reading. So it was quite a, yeah. So be able to read from the page and to be able to sketch it at the same time is quite a skill, I would say. But anyway, no, you've actually replicated that very, very well tonight. It's you know, yeah. I think that Jeff and Ray would have been pleased.
Yeah, it's very easy to grab resources from the internet because there's a smorgasbord of visuals about Revelation. So I was able to just snip and cut and paste, and there was so much stuff to draw from, and I didn't have to search forever to find stuff because it's just there. So yeah, it's just about putting it together, and that's one thing I thought was really cool, and that's what Jeff and Ray they brought up on. When you're drawing it, when you're actually putting it together, you are forced to really think about the positioning and of where it all is, and you're forced to actually think about it to the point where you've got to use the rest of the Bible, you've got to use other visuals. Yeah, and I think it really does help build